Before we jump into that today, I want to say a big thank you to those of you who were able to serve this past Friday night at the Big Walnut football concession stand. We had possibly our biggest group ever. It may not have been, but it was certainly close. We had almost 30 people serve this week, which made it as easy as possible at those games. I don't know what we did in sales, but it was a lot. It was a hot evening, and I'm just deeply grateful to all of you who served this past Friday for kicking us off really strong this year. We do have one additional ask with that. The football season is not one game, it is many games. And we had actually kind of a weird scheduling thing happen where we got the dates way earlier for the games this year than we ever have before. And then Vanessa, my wife, got a text just a couple weeks ago. Wednesday. Less than a couple weeks ago. Wednesday, letting us know that the game that we had been told was going to be September 4th was not. But it was, in fact, this coming Friday, which is earlier than September 4th. So we shifted that in our calendar. There was just a scheduling snafu that we just became aware of. So we had a whole crew for September 4th, and several of those folks cannot shift their own calendars. So I am up here semi-begging, to be clear, that if you are available this coming Friday and can help us out, we would love to have your help to serve at the football concession stands this coming week. Please. We've got a decent sized crew right now. We will be okay, but if you are available, we would love to have you join us. We do this so that no parents have to be in the concession stand during football games. It's as simple as that. So it's just a simple way for us to try to give back and make sure that parents can watch their kids play. So we'd love to have you if you are available. Now, all that said, we are in part 5 of a series that we've been going through where we've been going through the book of Joshua in the Bible. The series is called Strong and Courageous, and in part 1, we kind of kicked off this series, and I showed why the series is called that. But as we've walked through this book, we've covered a lot of ground, both historically and in terms of understanding some things about God and about us as people. If you haven't been around for it, I'm going to get us all caught up very quickly, and that matters because there's a thing that happens today that is tied in with all the rest of this. It's its own theme, but it's tied in with all the rest of this in a pretty important way. So in part 1 of the series, we looked at Joshua chapter 1 and how Joshua gives these commands to the people of Israel to be strong and courageous. This is where the series title came from, and we talked about what that means, what is being strong and courageous from a biblical perspective. In week 2, we talked about taking responsibility for building up God's people, the family of God, like how if we're a part of a church family, we can't just kind of reap the benefits of that and not participate and not give back and not help build the strength of the body. In part 3, we talked about how as we do our very best to serve God, we're going to mess up, and there's going to be times where we get things wrong, and how God's faithfulness stands with us through those difficult moments. And then last week, we talked about how each one of our individual faith, like the way that we interact with the world and our faith, impacts the people around us in a really profound way. And these different kind of movements this is one of the things I love the most about the Bible. I love many things about the Bible, but one of the things I love the most is that the Bible is fundamentally one big story made up of many different stories. And when we read those stories in kind of narrative form, instead of like a textbook, we see these very real human themes emerge. We see, if it's not just about like hunting for facts and memorizing things, but when we approach it the same way we would approach any good story, there's a layer of depth and richness that's easy to miss. And every one of these themes comes as we read this one book, the book of Joshua, as a single narrative that teaches us about who God is and about who we are as people. So we left off last week in Joshua chapter 14. And at this point in the story, God's people, the nation of Israel, have now entered into and begun to inhabit the promised land. Now, again, if this is kind of all new to you, many years before, hundreds, maybe thousands of years before, God had made a promise to a man named Abraham that he would create a great family from Abraham's descendants and give them a land to call their own, where they could then be a blessing to the entire world on God's behalf. And this is the first time in their history that they have actually begun to inhabit this land. And so now they're learning how to live in the land. And then Joshua chapters 15 through 22 are a little bit dry, just a little bit, because they are primarily records of the allotment of the land. So there were 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, and each one of them was allotted a specific portion of land. And Joshua 15 through 22 mostly documents that. So it's not the most engaging part of the story. It's not the most inspiring part of the story by any stretch, but it is important. And critically, in the midst of it, there is a really, really important theme. Again, I've said many times before that if you're reading the Bible, if you're walking through a story, and if there's some thing that happens that appears to kind of come out of nowhere, that's an important moment to just kind of press pause and go, hey, what's happening here? Because what often seem like odd details, maybe odd asides, often become some of the most impactful and rich moments in the Bible. Because the biblical authors, inspired by the Holy Spirit, did not just write random things down. And so in these moments where there might be something that appears to be random, it is often something that yields tremendous fruit if you dig into it. Today is one of those things. As God's people begin to inhabit the land, there's a new danger. And it's not a danger of swords or of spears or of armies. It's a danger that is much more hidden. And critically, it's a danger that for us is a danger that is every bit as significant, as prominent, as prevalent today as it was 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago. In fact, it's probably the greatest danger that the people of God have faced throughout all of history. And as we look at what happens in this one moment in the book of Joshua, we're going to rewind a little bit and we're going to look at how this is a theme that didn't just emerge in Joshua. It emerged far earlier, and it emerged for a very specific reason. So again, God's people now, God has begun to give them the land. They are inhabiting the land. They are learning to live in the land. And now there's this danger that we've got to deal with. So we're going to pick back up in Joshua chapter 16. And again, this is just in the middle of a bunch of chapters that are talking about how the land is being split up. Now, Joshua chapter 16 is only 10 verses long. It's short, and we're going to only read one of the verses. The first 9 verses all detail the boundary lines for the tribe of Ephraim, which is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then there's this one verse that on a surface read feels very, very out of place. In Joshua chapter 16, verse 10, it says this: they, being the people of Ephraim, they did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. This is an interesting moment, but it's an odd moment. And it's an odd moment because nothing else is said about this. It's just kind of this random detail out of nowhere. I should also mention for a moment, and we talked about this a little bit, I don't remember what week it was, but the book of Joshua was written probably 35-ish hundred years ago. And when we read passages about like people being made to do forced labor, that can evoke some images that are uncomfortable and difficult. And that's fair. But I do want to be clear that when it comes to a Sunday morning sermon like this, because according to my clock, I've got 21 minutes left. I can't tackle every one of those things. So I am not going to attempt to do that today. Other than to say that culturally things were different, and the words that are used to describe moments like this don't always mean exactly what we have in mind. But as is always the case, if you ever want to have a deeper discussion about any kind of issue like that, please do not hesitate to come to me. I love to sit down and talk about the Bible. It is absolutely one of my favorite things to do. So if you struggle with some of those passages, would love to help you through those. But again, let's return to the passage. Nothing else is said. What I want you to notice, though, is that the detail here that's interesting is that Joshua specifically records that the people allowed the Canaanites to continue living there. That's the theme that's going to be important in a moment. Now that theme continues in chapter 17. So immediately following this verse, we get to chapter 17. And chapter 17 starts out by detailing the land given to the tribe of Manasseh. So 16 is about Ephraim, 17 is about Manasseh. And as chapter 17 continues into verse 12, we see this theme come back up. So we're going to read chapter 17, verses 12 through 18. It says this, "Yet the Manassites were not able to occupy these towns," towns referenced a few moments ago, "for the Canaanites were determined to live in that region. However, when the Israelites grew stronger, they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. The people of Joseph said to Joshua, 'Why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for an inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly.' And so Joshua, who is the namesake of the book and the leader of Israel at the time, says, 'Hey, if you're so numerous, and if all the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaites.' And the people of Joseph replied, 'The hill country is not enough for us. And the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Bethshan and its settlements, and those in the valley of Jezreel.' But Joshua said to the tribes of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, 'You are numerous and very powerful. You will not only have one allotment, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots filled with iron, and though they're strong, you can drive them out.'" So again, it's the same kind of idea as what's happening in chapter 16 with Ephraim. I should also mention as a brief aside, there's a little bit here, it's like talking to the people of Joseph, and then there's Manasseh, and then Ephraim comes back up. Long story short, Joseph was the tribe, but Joseph's tribe got split into two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. That's all that's happening here, all right? So these people are all kind of being lumped together. As this happens, though, again, what I want you to notice is that we have a situation where there's a tribe that was allotted land and they didn't drive the people out. And then when Joshua presses them and says, "Hey, drive the people out," they're like, "But they have chariots with iron. They're pretty strong. Don't know that we're going to." And so in both chapters 16 and 17, we have these scenarios where the people of God, the people who are now inhabiting the land, are not driving out the people that lived there before. Again, on the surface, this might seem cruel. This is not, to be as clear as I can be, this is not God saying, just drive people out because. This is not God saying, well, hey, these people are occupying your territory, so remove them. That's not what's happening. To understand what's happening, we need to fast forward to Joshua 23. And in Joshua 23, we start to get a sense of why this matters. And the reason this matters is the principle today that is so significant. So let's look at Joshua chapter 23. At this point, the rest of the land has been divided and it's been given out, and Joshua is getting old. The beginning of 23 actually says that explicitly. Joshua says, I'm getting old and I'm going to die soon. And as the leaders of the nation of Israel did, he then began to give kind of final instructions to the people. And this is what he says in Joshua 23, verses 9 through 13. He says, "The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God." And now in 12, as Joshua has reminded the people of what God has done, he gets to the crux of the issue. He says, "But if you turn away, and if you ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out those nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back and thorns in your eyes until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you." And so here Joshua gets at the underlying why. Joshua is not saying, and God did not say drive out people just because I want you to drive out people. What Joshua identifies here, and what we're going to look more closely at in just a moment, is that the fundamental problem with allowing the people of the land to remain has something to do with the people becoming snares and traps. It has something to do with the people, there being something that could happen that will displease the Lord because of the other people. Now, Joshua in and of himself doesn't give that much information here because Joshua is drawing from well-known history that we don't have right here. Joshua is drawing from years and years, decades and decades of tradition, of teaching, of understanding that goes all the way back to the Exodus story. And in the Exodus story, in multiple places along the way, both in the book of Exodus, in the book of Deuteronomy, and in the other books that detail the Exodus story, God specifically talks about driving the people of the promised land out once they get there. And he goes into more detail through Moses of why this matters so much. So let's rewind one more time to the book of Exodus to look at what God says specifically. In Exodus 23, starting in verse 20, God says through Moses this, "See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared." That line, "the place I have prepared," is a direct reference to the promised land that Israel is now occupying in the book of Joshua. So I've sent an angel to bring you to this place that I've prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and I will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on you, will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you, and none will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you a full lifespan. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. So little by little I will drive them out before you until you've increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. The Hebrew word underlying here that is written as snare is the same Hebrew word that is written in Joshua chapter 23 when it says, they will be snares and traps. It's actually the word traps in Joshua 23. It's snares in Exodus, but it's the same Hebrew word. So there's a direct connection. And understanding this direct connection is crucial to understanding that God is not just being cruel. God is not just trying to destroy and ruin people's lives. God's commands to drive the people out from the land isn't just about having a clean slate. There's a purpose. There's a reason. God states it directly here. Where Joshua is a little bit more vague, God says it directly. Do not make a covenant with them or their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. These are not people who worshiped the God of the Bible, the God that the Israelites at the time knew as Yahweh. They're people who worshiped many other Near Eastern deities at the time. And many, if not all of those Near Eastern deities, commanded their people to engage in all kinds of behaviors and practices that God said were abhorrent, were evil. What God knew is that if he just sends his people into this land where there's all these other people living who are fervently devoted to their own gods, what was going to happen over time is the same thing that has always happened to humans. They would eventually become distracted by and associate with and accommodate too much of the culture that they lived in, which would make them turn, maybe not entirely, but would make them turn away from God and toward other gods. And worship of anything other than God alone is no worship of God at all. And so for God himself, this was a big deal. It was a big deal because he was the one who had done all that he had done for Israel. He was the one that had called them and that had promised them, who had led them out of slavery in Egypt, who had performed all these miracles and provided for them. And what God was saying is, listen, we got to get these people out, because if these people stay, you're going to end up serving their gods. And if you serve their gods, you won't be serving me at all. And as if God was not direct enough about that here, it's echoed actually in a whole bunch of different places. But the most stark one, I think, is in Deuteronomy chapter 7, where in Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 4, God says this: when the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drives out before you many nations. I mean, you're going to see the parallels. I mean, it's very clear. The Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. And the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. Now again, as we read through the Old Testament, there can be these moments that feel harsh, that feel cruel. There can be these moments where God seems vengeful. Being a parent has helped me gain some perspective on passages like these. The Lord in the Old Testament is described at times as being a jealous God. That was a passage that kind of idea didn't make a ton of sense to me, but the reality is now that I have kids, when my kids, Brooklyn would never do such a thing. When my kids complain about how bad they have it at home, there have been moments where I have expressed versions of, if you would like to go find a new home, you're welcome to. Because the grass is not actually greener, right? I know that. It seems like that. And again, Brooklyn would never say anything of that nature. Mason and Gavin back there, they would. Now, next week when Mason's in here for the first time, Mason would never, but I say it tongue-in-cheek as a joke. I'm not actually okay with my kids going to find another family, to be clear. But it makes me angry. And it makes me angry because I know what Vanessa and I have done to provide for them, to care for them for many, many years. I know how we talk every now and then and we'll be like, man, how did we not cure cancer before we had kids? What did we do with our time? You know, I don't know where it went. But now, we're almost 13 years in, and I can't imagine not having children to care for and to raise. And so when they express displeasure with the way that we parent or displeasure with the way that we live, whatever it might be, it makes me angry. Because it's like, you don't know what I've sacrificed. You don't know what we've done. And they don't. Of course they don't. I mean, I thought my parents were idiots for my whole life until I had kids. And then was like, oh, you guys did know some things, right? If you're a parent, you've been through this same exact road. There comes this moment where all of a sudden your parents start to get a lot smarter. Every kid goes through this. Every family goes through this, but it makes me mad as a parent because I know what we sacrificed. I know how hard we worked. I know what all we did. I know what all we put aside. I know how much more money we would have if they didn't eat all the food in the house like this. And that's similar to what's happening here, but on a significantly grander, more cosmic scale. God is saying, you are my people. I chose you. I made you my sons and daughters, and I did everything for you. So if you're going to decide to go find a new family and worship other gods, okay, you can do that, but I'm not going to be happy about it. And in that light, it doesn't seem quite so cruel anymore. It seems, frankly, to me, pretty understandable. Now, again, there's strong language in here, but what's most important is to understand what God is fundamentally saying. What God is fundamentally saying, what he's identifying in Joshua chapter 23 and Exodus chapter 23 and Deuteronomy chapter 7, is that there's a very powerful truth that all of God's people for all of time have had to grapple with. And that's that we are constantly being formed by the things we give ourselves to. Constantly. We are constantly being formed. We are always being formed by what we give ourselves to. Now, those of us here today that are Christians, that have chosen to put our faith in Jesus, that are here because we want to grow in our relationship with Christ, we want to learn how to be more Christ-like. We're investing in that right now. Today, right now, we are giving ourselves to Christ in this moment, learning how to become a little bit more like him, and that's a great thing. So we are being formed in this moment by what we're giving ourselves to, and that is awesome. And this time exists for 1 to 1.5 hours a week. And the entire rest of our week, we have choices about what we're giving ourselves to. This struggle has been one of the greatest struggles of God's people for all of time, because we are present in a world and in a culture that does not look like Jesus, that is not becoming more like Jesus, and where when we give ourselves to it too much, we end up becoming less like Jesus, yet we're present in it all the time. So we cannot remove ourselves from it. We cannot and should not, to be clear, just say, well, because the world is evil and terrible, we're going to just create a little bubble for ourselves where we're safe. That actually violates God's entire purpose to calling people to himself, which is to go show him to the world. So the question is not like, can we just say, well, we're not going to be present in a world that doesn't believe in God and that is so distant from him? No, the question is, how do we be present in a world that is far from God, yet seek to redeem it without engaging it in a way where it forms us? In other words, will we remain distinct enough to faithfully reflect Jesus to the world around us? Because at the end of the day, if God's people end up looking just like everyone else, then who does everyone else see when they look at us? Well, they don't see Jesus, because we look the same as everyone else. And when you read the gospel accounts of Jesus' life in the New Testament, every person that encountered Christ was changed. Everyone. Now, we don't know if they were all changed for better, but they were all changed, because you cannot encounter Jesus without being changed in some way. And today, God's people, the church, we are his embodiment in this world. So how do we live in a culture? How do we live in workplaces and in sometimes in families, in schools? How do we live in this world in such a way that we are still distinct, that we are set apart because we are wholly committed to Jesus without just removing ourselves? Ultimately, what God was warning the Israelites about, what he was warning his people about, was there is real danger in becoming like the people of the nations around you. When you become like them, then you begin to worship the things they worship. You begin to prioritize the things they prioritize. You begin to give yourselves to those things, and that foundationally shapes you. So if we're always being formed, then we've got to ask how to make sure that we are formed by the right things, in the right ways, and toward the right ends. A few moments ago, I read you the end of Joshua chapter 23, where Joshua was giving kind of his farewell speech. There's a beginning to Joshua chapter 23. And in that beginning, Joshua gives what I believe are the best instructions that we can look at for how to ensure that as God's people, we are being formed by the right things. So Joshua chapter 23, starting in verse 1, says this: after a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all the enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel, the elders, the leaders, the judges, and the officials. And he said to them, I am very old. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I've allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of the land as the Lord your God promised you. And then Joshua returns to a motif that he repeated multiple times in part 1. Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them, but you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. And so what Joshua identifies here is a very simple little pattern for ensuring that God's people remain God's people alone. And there's 2 images he uses. Number 1, do not turn to the right or to the left. Number 2, hold fast to the Lord your God. Hold fast. The image that comes to mind when I think of not turning to the right or the left is that of horse blinders. Horse blinders matter because horse blinders prohibit a horse from seeing to the right or to the left. Because if they see to the right or to the left, they will begin to go those directions. By maintaining vision straight ahead, they will walk in a straight line. The vision that comes to mind when thinking about holding fast is that of a holdfast, which probably most of us don't know about. In the house that we just purchased, I'm getting my workshop set up for the first time in 10 years, and I couldn't be more thrilled by it. And one of the things I'm planning on doing is building myself a workbench. I do some woodworking, and in a workbench, there are often little holes in the top of the bench that in previous eras would have been used to accommodate a tool called a holdfast. It's literally the name of the tool. It's a long iron, looks like a hook. The way it works is you put it down in a hole with a board underneath it, and the kind of hooked part goes right here, and then you hit it with a hammer on the top. And when you hit that holdfast with a hammer, you lock that board in. You cannot move it. I don't care how strong you are. It is not going to go anywhere. It's just physics. When you need to remove the board, you take your hammer and you hit the back side of the holdfast, and it pops right out. That's all there is to it. But when I say the board is held in place, I mean it is locked. You may as well just screw it down into the top. That's how firmly the holdfast holds the work. When Joshua says here to hold fast to the Lord your God, that's the image that he wants us to have in mind. That of clinging so tightly to God, clinging so tightly to Jesus that there is nothing that can pry you from him. And if you think for a moment about what that implies, if you hold that tight to Jesus, I mean, you can look to the right or to the left, but it's awfully hard to see around him. He can't get further away than this. Now, some of you have longer arms than I do because I don't have very long of arms. But even with the longest arms, he's never far. When we hold fast to Jesus, it means that Jesus consumes our vision. It means that Jesus consumes our lives. It means that what we give ourselves to is going to be Jesus more than anything else because nothing else is in our grip. Hold fast to Jesus so the world can see Jesus in us. The question isn't whether or not we're interacting with the world around us. I'm not trying to tell us today that we should engage in a culture war and we should try to reclaim the world for God. That's not the way the world works. If that's your passion, that's fine, go for it. But what I'm saying is that in the midst of a world that does not believe that God's truth is the truth, what we must do so that we do not become people too consumed with all those other things is hold fast to Jesus. Hold fast with an iron grip. hold fast to Jesus. When we do that, our vision becomes consumed with him. When we do that, the lens through which we see the world begins to become a lens that no longer says, well, the world is an evil place, but rather says the world is a broken place. When we hold fast to Jesus, we no longer see people who are far from God as an enemy that should be conquered, because that was never God's goal. God did not call his people to inhabit the land to take over the world one day. Rather, God called his people to inhabit the land to impact the world for him, to show the world who he was, so that all people might come to know him. See, the world isn't full of enemies. The world isn't full of adversaries. People that are far from God are not enemies to be destroyed. They're lost sons and daughters to be redeemed. And that is a fundamentally different thing. One says, away from me, and one says, come toward me. But you see then why it's so dangerous. Because if we don't hold fast to Jesus as we say, come toward me, the condition of the human heart, our natural pull is to kind of morph and become like the people around us. So it takes strength and courage. Be strong and courageous. It takes strength and courage to hold fast to Jesus, to be committed to neither turning to the right or to the left. But as we hold fast to Jesus, saying to the people around us, hey, come with me. Come with me, because I know a God who gives hope. I know a God who gives life. I know a man who gives peace. I know a man who gives joy. I know a person who, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you're experiencing in your life, he can redeem it. He can make the broken things whole. He can bind the wounds, and he can give you life. God didn't call a people to occupy a land. God called a people to change the world. God doesn't call churches to occupy land and take over cities, and God calls churches to be a light. Like a city on a hill that shines brightly into the darkest places in the world, because the darkest places are where the light is needed the most. And so for us as a church, we've got to understand that we're always being formed by what we give ourselves to. And we've got to choose to hold fast to Jesus, each of us individually and us as a church as a whole. Because in a culture and in a world that is increasingly against the things of God, the temptation is to do one of two things. It's either to become so much like everyone around us that we don't look any different and people can't see Jesus, or it's to sequester ourselves away and live in a little bubble. In either case, we lose what God wants for his people, which is to be his witness, to be his light, to offer hope to the people around us, not because of who we are, but because of who he is. My hope and my dream, my goal for this church over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years is that we would increasingly learn how to be a people that go out as a group, as individuals. That we would no longer see the places that we work, that we would no longer see the places we go to school, that we would no longer see people who are far from God. For those of us who do, that we would not see them as adversaries, that we would not see them as problems, but rather that we would be clinging so tightly to Jesus that we see them through his eyes. That in everything that we do, we would be seeking redemption, restoration, and wholeness for the people around us, because we have the hope of the world in Jesus. And that as we seek out and pursue lost people, that we would begin to see person upon person upon person baptized, finding life in Jesus, giving their lives to him, that we would see families restored and renewed, broken things being made whole, wounds being bound through the power of Jesus Christ. Because that is what God's people were always called to. And that's what it is for a church to be strong and courageous in a world that does not live much like Jesus. Let's pray today. Father in